last thing, I'm actually going to say something about the book. I'm going to answer 2 questions after which you can get dinner. And the 2 questions are the ones I've heard most frequently in the last 4 years. Is, who is Cesare Pavese? The second is, how on earth did you get interested? For the first, who is Cesare Pavese? I'll give you this. If that doesn't answer the question, particularly the first 5 chapters, which is biography, a short biography, nothing ever will. So I recommend that for who's Cesare Pavese. And to how I got interested in him, that's really less interesting to me as a question than why have I stayed interested in him nearly 50 years. And I was introduced to him the same way Leslie Fiedler was, which was on a Fulbright year in Italy. Mine was about 8 years after Fiedler, and Fiedler was there as a lecturer, and I was there as just a Fulbright scholar. But we both discovered him in Italy. What's kept me interested in him since 1960 are 2 things. One is the aesthetic pleasure of simply rereading his novels. There are 9 short novels. That was his preferred form. They go from maybe 100 to 150 pages. They're not hard to read in Italian. As I said, the translations are decent. They give a lot of pleasure, as does, I'm finding, his poetry, which I don't go over so much, I don't mention much in the book, but his poetry is growing on me also. So there's one, the pure aesthetic pleasure of reading a really fine author, which he is. The second was the intellectual, I don't know if it's a challenge or effort to understand what is it that made this really fine and important Italian writer so interested in our culture. He was crazy about America for 10 years in his life. From about the time he was, say, 17 to 27, he was absolutely intoxicated with American literature of the early 20th century and of the 19th century. Later in his life, he became indifferent to or absolutely hostile to American literature and culture. And why? What is it that went on in his life? That was really interesting to try and deal with. The other thing was, as I did the research, the biographical part, I came to really respect his morality as a worker, which is an odd thing to say about a writer. But Pavese was Piedmontese, and the Piedmontese have they're known as the workers of Italy. They're not the funny singing Neapolitans, they work what you. And he had a sense of what Italo Calvino called il morale di fare, which is the morality of doing, the morality of action. Because Pavese in his mature years was really quite an unhappy person. He never had a satisfactory relationship with a woman. He always felt alienated. Although his friends report that he was quite social, seemed normal to everybody he was dealing with. But his diary reveals that he really did have a kind of miserable interior life. But he never stopped working. He worked as much on other people's books as he did on his own books. Because when he died, he was what we would call the managing editor of the Einaudi Publishing House. And he brought into Italian culture not only American literature, but he was very interested in the latter part of his life in ethnography and myth, and what we would now call kind of the softer social sciences. And I have a number of things I could read from. I want to read from just one quote rather than a whole bunch of them, which speaks of his sense of the importance of doing what you can when you can do it. He had this sense, and he actually got it. Well, he crystallized it from reading Echo Matheson's American Renaissance, which is a book he adored in the late 40s. But there's the sense that you only have a certain time to do what you can do, and it's when you're mature, and you better do it then, because if you don't, after that you decay. And that speaks to people of my generation, which is the same as a number of the generation here, but even those younger might relate to it. So I just want to read you from an essay, short thing he wrote in 1949, August 1949, about a year before he killed himself. And the context is that he was complaining about a new Italian vogue of considering rebellious youth as kind of romantic cultural heroes. It's as though he were objecting to, say, a James Dean type stereotype which he saw develop in Italian literature. And he wrote, "This century has forgotten that the beginning is only a point of departure, that we are born to live and to age, and that between birth and death there is a stage of proper maturity, a perfect and courageous balance, for the love of which, as the Father of us all has already said, man must endure his going hence, e'en as his coming hither. Brightness is all." These rebels in short pants are essentially incapable of accepting nature, that maturity follows adolescence, and that maturity balances itself tragically for a brief, brave instant that contains in itself an entire culture. He wrote that after he had finished his next to the last novel and just before he started his last novel, The Moon and the Bonfires. And I believe that Pavese had that moment. He saw what it was, and he created, in fact, works which in the Italian canon really do represent an entire culture. And so I hope you will read the translations of his books, or his books in Italian if you can. I hope you will read my book, but I hope you will come to know him better, and I thank you for coming tonight.
And dinner, I think, is served.